People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
I first came to this planet in 1954 to kill beatniks. It sent me to take care of 12. That's not enough!
Blackie isn't an immortal from the killer's frequency. It was to take 12 lives that had only killed 9 when his allotted time on Earth ran out. A shame that he's lived with for over 42 years. Until now.
I come back to finish the kill.
I want you to help me finish the kill.
It's always that long drive home after prison day. And what's the first sign of humanity I see?
Well, what's a hippie?
What is it, like a beatnik or something?
Imagine someone who doesn't believe in war taking a bath.
Let's smoke some grass and start a revolution!
Maybe I could kill a hippie.
So what are we up against?
According to Larry, these beings are ultra-conservative in nature. They base their look on American culture of the late 50s.
I bought my car from the sleaziest creep in town. It runs behind the gears all trying to slip ain't mine and it broke down.
And there's nothing we can do about that? Compose it with another archetype.
Yeah.
I'm a loser, baby. Why would you waste your time? So loser, baby, don't even keep on trying. I'm a loser, baby. I ain't even got a job.
Loser.
Hey folks, welcome to a special episode of The Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. On this episode, I'm talking with John Michael McCarthy, all about his films and his comic book work. He's got a beautiful new book out all about teenage Tupelo, his movie that he did a little bit ago. He's had a wild career, and over the course of just an hour, he barely touches the surface. Thank you so much for listening. Definitely check out JMM's other films. They're available at Gorilla Monster Films. That's Gorilla, G-U-E-R-R-I-L-L-A, monsterfilms.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy this interview. How did you even get into filmmaking? What was your entree into that?
You asked the big questions. I always had an interest in cinema that was riffing off of the comic book interest. I was drawing comic books for Apple, Dark Horse, and then into Fantagraphics and Eros and Monster. I think I was the first cartoonist at Fantagraphics to do comics for their imprints that they had in the early 90s when they were struggling. And they did the Porno line of comics with Eros and the Monster line. Cool. John, come here. Here's my son, John. He just made a short film called Super Thrift. And all right, out of here. Go find me Super Thrift 2, the sequel. He jumped the gun. He's making a short film 11 years before I even made a film. But in 93, I wanted to draw a comic book idea called Damsel's Daughter of Helmus, which was a regional spin. I was trying to be autobiographical, but I was also trying to be mythological with Elvis worship and so forth. But that Damsel's idea turned into a fumetti of sorts, which was comprised of photographs from the movie that we went ahead and made for about $2,000 on Super VHS in Elvis Death Week, August of 93, and it premiered January Birth Week of 94. And I made the $2,000 back in an hour down at a bar. And I thought, wait a second, I've been drawing comic books that take 6 to 9 months to illustrate because I was very particular, competing against Peter Bag, Hernandez Brothers, Dan Clowns. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be good. I wanted to have a style, but I made $1,000 per book at Fantagraphics at the time, 91, 92, 93. And I just made $2,000 in an hour showing this movie that it took me a week, 10 days to shoot. And that kind of warped my perspective, probably in a way that it shouldn't have, because then I went into debt as the decade progressed, trying to make better movies.
I have to tell you, I have only known you as a filmmaker until this book came out. I didn't realize. I knew comic books were an influence, major influence. Of course, watching the Sore Losers opening up with the comics code and everything, knew that, but did not realize that you were so talented as an artist.
I'm more talented as a cartoonist than I am as a filmmaker.
That's saying something because I love your movies.
Well, they're informed by sequential art, graphic novel thinking. And when people give me, like, I'm a slave to Letterboxd, I do go on Letterboxd and I look at reviews of Damselous, Daughter of Helvis, Teenage Tupelo, Sore Losers, Superstarlet A.D, Cigarette Girl. Those are my main features. And if I get a bad review, sometimes I do, it's because I don't think the current audience, whatever they're called, understands the graphic novel influence. And beyond that, I would say the heavy metal influence, not the musical form, but the magazine, Metal Hurlant. When you and I were growing up, there was a lot of, I'm not going to say misogyny, but there was even in the comic books at the time, there was a lot of scantily clad females being caught up in adventures. And that really, and not to mention Playboy and all those other magazines, warped my whole perspective into how I saw fantasy taking place, whether it was comic books or movies.
So what was your first feature?
Damselous was a feature.
That was a feature. Okay. So you started off with a feature.
Why not? Seems like a comic book, just an issue. Do you think an issue of a comic book could comprise a feature?
It feels like a graphic novel or like a whole story arc. That feels more like a comic to me.
It occurs to me that anybody who was doing comic books in the 80s, in the autobio stuff, whatever, obviously that stuff selling well enough? No matter who your publisher was, Kitchen Sink, Dark Horse, Apple, Fantagraphics, Eclipse, Pacific. How could you make a living off of doing that? In other words, you had to either be making a living doing something else, and I'm talking about myself being lower middle class income bracket or no income sometimes, and planning to get married on top of that, and not marrying somebody who had any money whatsoever. I don't understand how anybody could just dedicate their lives to drawing comic books around the clock unless they were, dare I say it, a trust fund kid or had some sort of means of survival. And I did not. I did not have that. And I think subconsciously or not, that informed am I going to sit here for 9 months and draw this thing, which would have been a great solitudinal, thing. I've often thought that comic books are a isolationist loner activity. And if you have any kind of money to support you, then so be it. Or if you're fast, then you're great. I was not fast. I was trying to figure out my style, which landed somewhere in the EC canon of Wally Wood and Jock Severin and Jack Davis and Kurtzman and all that stuff. But I had a lack of money. If you're trying to draw like Wally Wood and you have no money, odds are you're going to take 9 months to draw a comic book or long. So that always stymied me. And Gary Groth was like, where's the comic book? And I'm like, hey, it's coming. But I shot Damselous in 2 weeks, tops, and made twice the money, charging suckers at the door to watch a lot of nudity and exploitation, tropes of exploitation cinema, which I discovered reading research, Incredibly Strange Films in 86, which had festered in my brain.
I remember the first thing I saw by you was probably Teenage Tupelo. And that was so impressive that you were making features, full-fledged features out of your hometown with a pretty small cast, but they were great. And it was just so admirable that you were out there doing it. I don't know if people listening to this remember what the scene was like back in, 95 when Teenage Tupelo was out?
On Something Weird video, yeah. So you probably would not have even heard about Teenage Tupelo had it not been for Mike Vraney at Something Weird, who agreed to release the first brand new release of a new product out of Something Weird, which had dedicated themselves to lost films in 50s, 60s, 70s, spook shows, road show, grindhouse, whatever you want to call it. I don't know if you heard me talk about this or not with Vraney, but he was in Seattle as well, just like Fantagraphics. It's almost like Fantagraphics was, to me in the 90s, what Memphis was to Elvis in the 50s. But I was in Memphis in the 90s. And so Seattle was my new Memphis, transmogrified by 40 years, if you will, or even if you won't. It's still, that's what happened. And I'm still in the underground. I'm still like struggling to figure out how I'm going to make my house payment. Because we have not transcended in the last corporatized decades. They fucked us up and the man had figured out a way to stop the underground from assimilating into the mainstream, unless it's through new generational internet, whatever. I don't know. I have no idea. Hopefully my son or AI will profit from this. But you would not have heard of Teenage Tupelo had it not been for Mike Vraney, our League of Mikes. And Damselous Daughter of Elvis was self-released by me, although the Fantagraphics comic book had come out. But it's not like that led to any sort of grandiose amount of orders, VHS, whatever, because I had the feeling that the people at Fantagraphics that knew me and liked my style and saw where it was going felt like maybe I was a betrayer because I'd switched over to VHS. What the fuck? And maybe I missed a grand opportunity to not stick with it and have done something more in kind with Hellboy or something like that, where you sell your rights and make $100,000 and then that's your claim to fame. But I didn't want to, I don't know. It didn't occur to me.
Tell me a little bit more about Teenage Tupelo, because you're out of the gate, second feature film that you're doing. How autobiographical is the film? You have characters named after you, your mom.
So okay, first let me ask you, did you see the Blu-ray?
The Blu-ray is freaking amazing. I couldn't believe how much content you had on there. I think I counted like 20 some hours worth of stuff on that. That was
20 hours. I've been telling people 6 hours. You think 20?
I couldn't believe how many features there were. And just, yeah, it was amazing.
First of all, thank you for, I don't know how much of that you plowed through.
Quite a bit of it. Yes.
Was it, so it held your interest?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And for me too, just the movie is the movie, which I love, but then to see the process, to see the behind the scenes a little bit, just like to get that flavor of what you were doing back during that time it was a time capsule. It was a trip down memory lane for me, a lot of it.
Sure, because of your magazine and everything that was happening at the time and so forth. So did you foray off into the Native Son, Destroy Memphis, all that stuff?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Because I suppose in a way that informs you about who I am as a person or what my interests are or what I can carry out with a one-chip video camera if I want to make documentaries. Or Teenage Tupelo was shot on Super 8 film.
Mm-hmm.
Damselous had been shot on Super VHS. Hugh Gallagher, who had made the Gore trilogy, Goronica, Gorgasm, Gorotica, had filmed it for me, Damselous, but I wanted to make a film because I thought I was supposed to be a filmmaker. I was a literalist. I thought you had to shoot on film. And remember that movie, Man Bites Dog, where it was the war between the video people and the film people? That made a heavy impact on me. And I think French movie, I think. So I'm like, I told my friend Darren Ipema, who had filmed it came in at the end of Damselous, but filmed all of Teenage Tupelo on Super 8 on a Bolu 5008 camera, which was given to me by Robert Walters in Texas, who had basically funded Hugh Gallagher's Gore trilogy. I said, we got to shoot this on film. And up until the last minute, we thought we were going to shoot 16 millimeter. But the night before, it's always the night before scenario was me and Darren. We get Robert Walters sends us his Bolu 5008, which hasn't used. And even in the early 90s or mid 90s, the video revolution is coming. Everybody wants to do something cheaper, whatever. But I knew that Teenage Tupelo would profit from having the soft, silent movie glow of a film stock. And so that's what we did and filmed it that way. Damsel's Daughter of Elvis was a fantasy take on Big Daddy Roth meets Rockabilly meets LSD that I was taking at the time, foray into my love affair with my ancient memory from childhood of seeing Bridget Bardot in a Famous Monsters of Filmland poster for sale that for $1 I could never afford. How does this work? Out of Captain Company. I didn't know what that was all about. And then finding out later the connections between that, and that's a whole other topic that I won't go down a rabbit hole on. But with Teenage Tupelo, I never knew who my biological mother was. I certainly didn't know who my biological father was. I found out accidentally that I was adopted when I was 20 years old. And it explained a lot of things, how I was different from my parents and my cousins. Actually, it was a relief in some ways. But at the same time, I was wanting to make a film adaptation of Cadavra, which was the monster comic book that I'd done for Monster Comics Fantagraphics imprint, which was about a girl made from the pieces of dead movie stars. Sharon Tate, Jane Mansell, Marilyn Monroe, Claudia Jennings might have figured in, I'm not sure. And at a punk club here in Memphis called Barristers, which had taken the place, unfortunately or not, of a better originator club called The Antenna, which I cut my teeth on punk rock music and basically got a better education at the Antenna Club than I got at art school here in Memphis at the time in circa 84 to 86. But now as the 90s were beginning, I found myself in Barristers, and lo and behold, I see this girl who's there looking the epitome of rockabilly, who would be from Denton, Texas, where they shot some of Rocky Horror, named Elena Tennell. And I was smitten, and I'm like, she could be Cadavra. But as I got to know Delana, and she called me, Jack Oblivion, band called the Oblivions, who were here in Memphis, he gave her my card that night. She called me from a phone booth the next day at Sun Studio and said, hi. She always had a Betty Boop voice. She still does. And she said, hi, Jack Oblivion gave me your card, and he said that I should be in one of your movies. And I pitched her on Cadavra, but I really, at the time, thought there's no way we can do a sci-fi fantasy Tim Burton, Terry Gilliam-esque thing, which I still fucking want to do 40 years later. If anyone's interested, a cool million, I'm sure we'll cover it. Contact the station. But I said, hey, how would you like to play my mother in a movie called Teenage Tupelo? I'd like to get a couple of things off my chest. I don't want to do it as an autobiocomic. I'd rather do it as a film, which I saw as an evolution, progression to what Fantagraphics was doing and all the other publishers were doing at the time in the all comics thing. And let's face it, it was the beginning of the 90s. What else you got? I didn't want to, if I couldn't draw a comic book fast enough to be competitive with the people that I worshiped and that I really loved and that were shaping my own sense of reality, then why couldn't I branch off into this sexploitation film world and tell a story about my mother getting pregnant with me and giving me away for adoption, or not, as the story would go in Teenage Tupelo. So Delana said, oh, that sounds interesting. And I said, would you take your clothes off in the movie? I want to see some naked pictures of my mother. And she goes, sure. So I'm like, damn, she didn't even hesitate. Before that, she appeared in Hugh Gallagher's Gore Whore. And it was a good thing because I wanted to see if Delana wasn't timid, wasn't squeamish, and wouldn't change her mind, which a couple of other actresses, would-be actresses, had done, which was their prerogative. But if I've got 10 people waiting to do something and we're depending on the lead actress doing what she said she was going to do, and then she changes her mind, it was a far cry from me just drawing naked women in the Eros titles for Fantagraphics. Now I was actually working in 4 dimensions with women who had exalted themselves to be starlets, theoretically. And Delana blew my mind. She was also adopted, like I was, as it turned out. And of course, the Teenage Tupelo book that Fantagraphics just put out goes into that. I think a lot of comic book artists are frustrated filmmakers or wannabe filmmakers. The only reason I'm going to be remembered of anything of any importance is not by combobulating a bunch of EC artists to create a style, which obviously always owes back to them, or even being some sort of what the critics call John Waters, Russ Meyer configuration, which I don't think I really am. I think I am something different, but critics only know what they know in a commercial vein, because capitalism is the controlling effort as to what any reader is going to understand. And if you don't understand what the writer is saying, then why read the writing? And the next thing he's on the soup line. So I get all the comparisons, but it would be great if people knew about Doris Wishman or David Friedman or whatever, a tangent. But I wanted to be an underground cartoonist or alt cartoonist, as it were, who progressed into underground film, which I was learning about from Fantagraphics and graphic novels over to something where video and sexploitation films, and they're located in the same city of Seattle. So I made the leap, and I don't think it was that big of a deal. And since we were in the last bit of the 20th century, I was able to, and the women that worked with me and the men and the crew and all the people that helped me make the films, which was a complete collaborative effort, to which I'll just say this: cartooning is an isolationist sport. You sit in a room by yourself. You can't not be distracted. It would help if you had a little money in the bank. It would help if you didn't have children. If you do have a girlfriend or a wife, they need to be in service to making sure that you're creating, which means you're not being with them, which is counterintuitive to having relationships. But being a filmmaker, you suddenly have to become a social butterfly. And so I think that is the toughest transition from being a cartoonist over to a filmmaker. Otherwise, I would have thought the Hernandez brothers would have made their own Love and Rockets film, or Dan Clowes would have made his own Lloyd Llewellyn or 8-Ball movie, or Peter Bagg would have made his own Hate movie. But they were so secured with their fan base in comics that they could not maybe take that chance or opportunity.
What was the response to Teenage Tupelo when it came out?
Because something weird had put it out, I got reviewed in all these magazines. The last gasp of magazine publishing in the 20th century in the 90s, the last porno mags, all that stuff, before it went totally virtual. So I got the most kindest, most brilliant reviews in porno mags like Swank and Genesis, Swank Adult Video. It's so weird to think of my pubescent world of reading Playboy and whatever I could get my hands on. Or it's suddenly now this movie I've made are in these porno mags 30 years, 20, whatever, not 30, 20 years later, and being liked, if not loved, by certain critics. And those reviews are reprinted in the Teenage Tupelo book that just came out. And of course, there were other magazines too. What I tried to do, Gary Groff, the publisher at Fantagraphics, he's like, Mike, if you want to reprint these reviews that have been in all these magazines, which probably covers 20, 30 pages in the book, it's almost like it's a 400, almost 400 page book of all kinds of things, essays, interviews, reviews. A chunk of it is reviews. And my girlfriend, Annalisa Marie Jones, and I, and another great guy, Chip Lamy, who had done a thing called Video Crypt, the three of us had to go and seek out permissions from all these reviewers to get permissions to have their reprints in the book, because Gary didn't want to be sued. He didn't want to have any trouble because he'd been sued before. And I, being negative about it, I believe the negative will out. Eventually you'll die, right? The negative outs are, in my case, it could be a positive, but whatever, but the negative outs. So I just expected all these people to be psychologically demented, because why would they have even put out fanzines or magazines to begin with? Speaking to yourself, even, what's wrong with you?
I wish I knew.
So I'll be goddamn if 90%, 95% of all the people we reached out to said, yes, go ahead and reprint the review. And even the people that we could not reach, basically the people we couldn't reach were the people that we couldn't get permission from because we couldn't get in touch with them. Maybe they'd passed away. I know there was a Southern and Rocket magazine in England. The guy had passed away. Couldn't figure out who owned the rights. A lot of the reviews and things were repetitive, but not so much that I didn't think they deserved to be in a compendium where you got to see all this stuff. And then, of course, there were glowing reviews from magazines that normally did not give glowing reviews, like Psychotronic and so forth.
We talked a little bit about the reaction to it. Is it successful enough for you to then get funding for the next film easily, or are you struggling still in order to make The Sore Losers?
Struggling because what I'm doing is personal, and I suppose if you look at reviews on Letterboxd, they sometimes use the word avant-garde. And I'd watched my Truffaut and my Fellini and my Antonioni, and it seemed like they had a superior way of, they were doing their own underground graphic novel thing on celluloid. To me, Fellini and Godard, even Gilbert Hernandez in Love and Rockets, his Luba stories in Love and Rockets, I think, were heavily influenced by Italian and French filmmakers from the 60s. That's what I was seeking to do with Teenage Tupelo. With The Sore Losers, I thought, shit, let's use 16 millimeter Aeroflex cameras. Let's shoot color. Let's make it psychedelic in a more honest way, not in a sort of video filter way, but just and use these garage rockers. But these people were so behind the times, they were ahead of their times, and they could have saved rock and roll going into the 20th century following the whole grunge thing or whatever thing that was. And those are the people that I had in The Sore Losers. That did not mean that I was going to get any money easily from anybody. And I didn't, but I got $10,000 from a guy named Dan Spector, who was a sculptor here in Memphis, who took a chance because he liked Teenage Tupelo. But I wasn't interested in repeating Teenage Tupelo. I was wanting to use every trope available to me from psychotronic exploitation cinema to tell a story that obviously had to evolve around people who were better at playing guitar maybe than acting. My friend Darren Ippabai, who had filmed Teenage Tupelo, he was the camera operator and cinematographer, director of photography on Sore Losers. He got the camera the night before we started shooting, but Darren was so adept and born to make film, he had to change film in a camera bag and all that. We spent $10,000 on an Aeroflex rental package. But the actual answer to your question is no, it was not easy. It was credit cards. It was the kindness of certain people. And I always tried to spell it out up front that it was very likely that they weren't investing. They were being patrons, meaning that they get their money back. There was a lady named Trisha Fudge who used to come into the mail center in Memphis. I worked at this copy place that people had mailboxes there. And I was like, every day, 20, 30 people would come in the store to check their mail. And I could tell by the kind of mail they got, whether they had money, if they were interesting people, what was going on in their lives. And there was this one lady named Trisha Fudge, and she was probably in her 30s. And I said, I'm making this movie, The Sore Losers. You wouldn't consider taking your top off in this movie, would you? Because I can show you the script. It's all on the up and up. We're very professional, but I want to make a film with nudity. And she's like, I wouldn't take my top off. She goes, but thank you for asking. When my boss found out, he's, Mike, are you asking women to come in to take their tops off? And I'm like, actually, I'm asking them if they want to put money into the film. And then as an aside, maybe they could appear in the film, blah, 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 but only if there's a part for them. It's not like I'm just like wholesale. And he's like, well, don't do that anymore. But I'd already done it just to the point where Trisha Fudge came back to me and she goes, Mike, she goes, you don't know what you did for my ego and my sanity. She goes, I'm getting older. If you think I look good enough to be naked in a movie, she goes, I don't know how much I appreciate that. She goes, I don't want to do that. She goes, I've got two girls that are young and I'm saving for them to go to college, but they're just in third, fourth, fifth grade, whatever. She goes, I will give you $5,000 that I'm saving for my kids' education. I'll just go ahead and give you that now to put into your movie, but I won't appear naked in the movie. And I'm like, okay. So that's the kind of people that not everybody, of course, nobody was insulted. Nobody was triggered or anything like that. But because I was desperately trying to find the right people who understood what I was doing, not insult anybody or whatever. But we got the money, which was at the end of the day, about $31,000 to make the movie.
You eventually would start to find actors that would appear in more and more of your films. Where did they come from?
The Antenna Club or Barristers. The Antenna Club was the CBGBs of the South. And for all I know, it might have had its roots earlier than CBGBs, maybe, because it was a place called the Well before it was the Antenna. This is before I ever moved to Memphis. The Antenna opened probably as early as 81. And I moved here in 84 to go to art school. And the Antenna scared me because men and women that went to the Antenna looked like your classic ancient flipside videotapes of the way kids looked when they were counterculture, taking their cues from the Sex Pistols or the Ramones or Susie and the Banshees or the goth, certainly the goth movement that was happening after punk and so forth. So the Antenna Club was all black light, and you could see cat pee, basically, if there was any in there. And everyone wore white T-shirts back in the hardcore days, and there were televisions mounted on the walls and so forth. There was no such thing as an ugly person because punk rock transmogrified you into this work of art where you took the thing that you didn't have and you amplified it. I saw so many beautiful women in my quasi-virginal state, and my tongue was out all the time. And I'm like, my God, these people should be in their own Memphis version of Search and Destroy or Another State of Mind or some of these Penelope Spheris type movies, Corman movies. But I didn't know what I was doing at that point. I didn't even know how to draw very well at that point. And the art school wasn't helping any because they frowned on comic book art at that point, 84. Eventually, in the 90s, they had sequential art and so forth, but they wouldn't allow me to teach it because I didn't have a master's degree. But I met these people at Antenna, or I saw them at Antenna. By the time we went to Barristers, I was in my 30s. I was not afraid. I was not intimidated. I figured I had the willpower to be the social butterfly, to ask people, and if nothing else, to get shock value out of it. And I didn't really have a circle of friends, though. The friends that I met became my friends by following through on what they said they were going to do. If somebody said, agreed to be in a film where they had to challenge rules and authority and perceptions and things and call it what you will, chauvinism, whatever. I wasn't interested in seeing naked guys. I'm not gay. Although some people have wondered, am I gay for making the kind of films I make? But I didn't see any naked women in high school. So by God, I wanted to see some later in life. I had to catch up. I was very forward with my dating or my intimidation factor early on when I was a teenager was out of control. So I think I made up for it. Also, I have to say that I wasn't asking just anybody. I was asking people that women especially, that seemed to me to be the most gorgeous creatures on earth. People that embodied an aesthetic that was what I'd been trying to draw in comic, like Delana.
Is that where you met Corinne?
No, have I ever met Corinne? That's the question. Corinne Elkins, who was in The Sore Losers and Shine On Sweet Starlet and Emmy Collins short film Headshot. Haven't seen her since. Wonder if she's still alive. Hope you're okay, Corinne. If anyone knows if Corinne is alive, I need to know. Corinne was a special case. She had been photographed by this LA photographer named Justice Howard, who was knocked down, gorgeous, and been on like Maury Povich, I think, or talk shows in the 80s by a motorcycle chick and extremely cantilevered. Russ Meyer would have been proud to have put Justice Howard in a film. Anyway, Corinne had been photographed by her, and She was a product of Eagle Rock / Hollywood. And my wife at the time, Dawn Ashcraft, who was in Teenage Tupelo and in Damselus, she and her friend, Kristen Hobbs, who was a starlet, who never bothered to have a fake name, they went to, what was it? Spokane, Washington to go to Garage Shock in 95. And at the time I was trying to piece together how to make the Sore Losers or who to be in it. And I thought it was going to star Delana and her boyfriend, James, who was in a band called Fireworks. And Darren and Janet, who were in Fireworks, I thought they were all going to be the four people, the Fantastic Four of the Sore Losers. And that didn't turn out. Kim and Kristen, Dawn Ashcraft, Kim, they left a flyer for Teenage Tupelo with my phone number on it at Hollywood Book and Poster as they were passing through on their way to see Garage Shock in Washington, and where they would see Impala play. Impala had done the music for Teenage Tupelo. They would see the Makers play. Mike Maker would be in Sore Losers. So Corinne Elkins supposedly walks up Hollywood Boulevard, goes into Hollywood Book and Poster, hangs out with Eric Caden, Buddy Barnett, maybe, who was the editor of Cult Movies magazine at the time, who actually was born and grew up in Memphis, Buddy Barnett. And so Corinne, as she always told me, she goes, I went to Hollywood Book and Poster, and one of your flyers for Teenage Tupelo had blown out onto the sidewalk and into the alleyway. And I went into the alleyway and got your flyer, and it had your phone number on it. And this is the phone. She just calls me out of the blue one night, and I answer the phone, and I don't know what I'm talking to. She's a man, woman. So I said, Corinne, okay, there's a part for you in the movie. Just talking to you over the phone, and I think you pretty much have it, but I want to see some pictures of you. So she sends me this package, which I still have to this day. In fact, I think I scanned it and put it on the Sore Losers. But yeah, that's how Corinne became involved. And when I saw her, I'm like, my God, she looks like David Johansen's twin sister, except with an amazing figure and a beautiful breast and willingness to do things that Delano would probably never do in a million years, and affordable and anxious to be immortalized and be remembered, because she's not a poet laureate. She's not Pulitzer Prize material. She's a whole other thing. She, as people have called her, my divine in a John Waters sense. Whereas Delana was more my Betty Boop, Betty Page, Betty Cooper, Betty Willman, Betty, whatever Betty you would call it. Delana was completely 180 degrees from Corinne. When they were cast together in the Sore Losers, they complemented each other, and there was an honest, not getting along kind of thing. It was natural. Corinne didn't care if anyone got along with her or not.
How did you get Guitar Wolf for the film?
Oh, God. At Barrister's, Guitar Wolf, I guess, were playing, or they had played the antenna, which was still open. Anyway, Eric Oblivion, who had formed the Oblivions with Jack Yarber and Greg Cartwright from the Compulsive Gamblers, and we saw all those first shows at Barrister's, and then they played the antenna. Eric comes up to me with Seiji, the guitar player, the three-piece, the Tokyo Ramones Guitar Wolf, who's, I hope your listeners, if they don't know who these people are, Googling this stuff and looking it up. Eric, who had founded Goner Records and has Goner Fest continually every year. His very first Goner record was on Guitar Wolf. So he's like, hey, Mike, you should meet these guys, Guitar Wolf. They spoke no English, just Japanese. I spoke no Japanese. I didn't even speak English. I spoke American. And I'm from Mississippi, so that gives you the curve there. So Eric's like, anyway, you guys should talk. And I guess, I don't know what he had in mind. Maybe I was going to do their video, which I eventually did do their videos later. And maybe I had mentioned to Eric that I needed some Men in Black characters. And this was before the Men in Black movies, by the way. And I didn't want to miss a beat. I knew they were busy. I said, would you guys want to be in my movie, Sore Losers? And Seiji, I maybe was picking up on some things that I said in English, and he was like, oh, yes. I don't even know. He didn't say, what's it about? And I'm like, okay. I'm like, what do you guys want to be in the movie? And I'm thinking, okay, I'm wanting him to say, oh, we want $500 or we have to fly here. We're going to do this. We need money. And he goes, what we want for being in movie. And I'm like, yes. And he goes, laser beam from eyes. And I'm like, you want laser beams shooting out of your eyes? He goes, yes, that's what we want. And I'm like, my God, I'm like, these people don't care about money. They only want some effect to linger in people's minds for eternity. Immortality of a certain lo-fi, no budget sort. Yes, I can do that. We faxed each other because that's what you did. And we faxed back and forth. And I think they had someone who could speak English, write English, and that person would be writing to me and I would write back. And I still have, well, those faxes are scanned and they're on the Sore Losers Blu-ray. And so, boom, they plan a fucking tour of America around the flight that's going to bring them here. And then they plan for the 2 or 3 days I need them. And then on top of that, I get Alicia Trout, who is a master, like just a genius in her own right, making music, Alicia Pop. She was in the Lost Sounds with Jay Retard out of Memphis. She was in a band called The Clears. But anyway, she might have been dating Jack Oblivion at the time. It's her job to go to the airport and pick up Guitar Wolf and bring them 100 miles away to near Tupelo, Mississippi, out in the middle of the woods where the roads were just paved 4 years before while I was at college. Oh, I'm sorry, 10 years before. So she does all this. She brings Guitar Wolf to Mississippi. And of course, all the people had to go to Mississippi where I controlled my universe. This, what was left of my father's property that I grew up on, 50 acres when I was a boy, which had now dwindled down to about 3 acres. And we broke all the rules, public nudity, all kinds of stuff in the dark of the night. And my old friend that I'd grown up with, who was older than me, a guy named Perry Sawyer, I saw him at one point. He's, man, I drove down the road and you had women lit up like Christmas trees on the side of the road. And I'm like, that is an apt description because you got to light them, reflecting light. You got to see something. So anyway, Guitar Wolf. And the other thing was all these garage rockers and starlets, they couldn't really drink. I had their apt attention, and the closer and sooner that they listened to me, the sooner we would get to Memphis, where all the liquor stores were. So it was in their best interest to do what I said, film the Sore Losers, get to Memphis, where we had a show. We put on a show called Garagezilla, which was the Sore Losers Bash, and the Makers, Mike Baker was the MC. Guitar Wolf, the Oblivions, the Royal Pendletons, a lot of other great bands played.
I was curious too how you met Emmy Collins, because I remember meeting him a long time ago. Interesting cat, and he had a lot to do with your films. I forgot about that.
How did you meet Emmy?
I think he was at he maybe showed up at Micro Cinefest, or it might have been Maryland Film Festival. But yeah, because I remember talking with him. He had done some work, and I don't think it's even on his credits. He had appeared as one of the apes in that Tim Burton Planet of the Apes movie, or he was pulling my leg. Either way, I think it's a great story.
Emmy is the godfather of my children. He is the hippie in John Waters Pecker, who is taking things out of shopping carts at the beginning of the movie and putting things in carts and all that. He plays Paul Cantor, I think, at the beginning of a Jefferson Airplane sequence in Terry Gilliam's Fear and Loathing. He was always getting these jobs in LA in the 90s as an extra or as some sort of person who had screen time. He was in People versus Larry Flint, but a lot of that got cut out so that he wound up really working in The Office. And so all the screen art, production art that you see in Larry Flint, the movie, is stuff I drew. And so I was the guy who was drawing Chester the Molester cartoons, and they shot it in Memphis. So I had an in, and I was hired on, by this guy named Philip Richelieu. Is that right? Who had worked with Truffaut on 400 Blows. I was like completely impressed. And here he was, this older gentleman who was getting Hollywood work, and he was the director of photography, I think, unless I'm getting this wrong, on The People versus Larry Flint. Anyway, there was an antique store downtown or some shop front that had been converted into the Hustler Club. And ironically, one of the things I was used to get my job was I was drawing cartoons for Hustler magazine at the time because I knew the editor, and that sort of gave me an in addition to some other things. And across from me in the corner was this guy, hippie dude. And here I am thinking about a movie about killing hippies. And I said, "Hey man, you have long hair. You look like a hippie. Can I kill you in my next movie, The Sore Losers?" He's, "Oh, sure, dude." Because everybody's waiting for the question, right? There is no stammering. There is no, let me go home and think about it. It's like, yeah, sure. Let me meet your wife. Let me come over and have fried chicken. Let me meet the band that's practicing in your living room. That was Emmy. It still is. And God, I don't talk to him as much as I should, and I haven't seen him in a long time, but we catch up occasionally. But anyway, 96, February, he's in my living room and becoming a part of the world that helped me shoot Teenage Tupelo, and loved, adored by everybody in the Memphis punk and film scene, and did show up on screen with lines in The Sore Losers opposite Jack. And he helped me make Superstarlet A.D. and helped me make Cigarette Girl. And I helped him make Headshot, Jack the Dipper, and a very rarefied film called The Egoist, which is about as taboo as I think we ever got.
You did send me The Sore Losers and Teenage Tupelo, and I can't thank you enough. What other movies of yours are on Blu-ray now?
That's it. People are constantly asking me, when's Superstarlet A.D. going to be released? The producer, Mike Miller, as I understand it, sent a letter to Troma a couple years ago saying, we do not want the contract renewed. We want to retain the rights to whatever we want to do with Superstarlet A.D. moving forward. If I could find an investor, a patron, I would reassemble, rescan, redo everything and put out a Superstarlet A.D. disc, a Blu-ray disc, that would be so loaded with photographs. That movie was more photographed than Teenage Tupelo. And I would include Shine On Sweet Starlet, which had some of the same starlets, especially the LA contingent, the Velvet Hammer contingent. Just a quick aside, me and Emmy, Victoria Renard, my platinum blonde floozy photographer, gum-smacking, lots of that. Steering wheel coming off in her hands for her 64 Falcon as we went from Seattle, where she lived, back to Memphis, where she moved in spring of 97 to show The Sore Losers. We went up to the Vice Party tour. Delana had a primitive cell phone that weighed 3 pounds. It was in the back seat. Had shows. Corinne played at Hollywood Moguls in LA, and Long Gone John at Sympathy, who put out all my vinyl soundtracks. He was there. Got to meet him. All these people that meant so much to me in the 90s, doing the stuff that I was doing, all those bands that performed for The Sore Losers on the road, I took their music and I put it into a Shine On Sweet Starlet soundtrack. People are asking me, where's Shine On Sweet Starlet? Where's Superstarlet A.D.? I would try to put the Vice Party tour experience, Shine On Sweet Starlet, the soundtrack even for that, and Superstarlet A.D. onto a Blu-ray and release that. I toured Europe with Superstarlet A.D. and Elvis Meets the Beatles, but I need patronage. I need sponsorship. I cannot do this by myself. So it's a matter of who's out there, who wants to contact me, it's a question. But of course, I would love to do that. And eventually, maybe there's a box set of everything, but I don't know yet.
That was always something that I always appreciated about your work, was that it wasn't just the movie, that there was the soundtrack, and getting the disc and having the soundtrack in there, and just being able to experience so much. Because it was, I think I still might even have a poster for one of your movies around, because you knew how to push the films. And was that just you, or did you have people helping you out with some of the marketing and some of these ideas?
Nobody was helping me. Of course, Emmy and Victoria were taking pictures or doing what they could do or helping me set up shows or whatever. And maybe that's one reason I'm still in the underground, is because I did not have John Waters' father's money or whatever class warfare or whatever the case might be. I had the incentive. I still have the energy. I don't know why at this point in my life to create more formulaic or more commercial screenplays. But at the time, I had already played in the Rockroaches. I'd played in Distemper, a hardcore punk band. And I was coming through Memphis. I knew how important Memphis was to the history of rock and roll. And my Elvis knowledge was expanding, growing, becoming richer. I was understanding the importance of rock and roll being created in Memphis, Sun Studio, Stax, all this stuff. So when it came time to do soundtracks, these people younger than me, I was handpicking like the band Impala. There could have been no other connection to a band that would have made Teenage Tupelo come to life visually, orally, like Impala was able to create that landscape. And the Sore Losers, I took another approach where it was like a sampler of garage rock bands, but mostly bands that I'd seen here in Memphis, bands that were in the movie, that kind of thing. With Superstarlet A.D., it was more of a ethereal landscape of 4-track recordings, a lot of them from Shelby Bryant, a lot of them from Tim Filippa, who's passed away in New York, in Brooklyn, who was doing 4-track recordings that Alicia Trout had turned me on to. Alicia's on Superstarlet A.D. She's on Sore Losers. These are like friends of mine who were willing to give me music for free, which made the overall products more thought-provoking to hear them. I will tell you this, Superstarlet A.D. is going to be released for the very first time on vinyl through Chaputa, Chaputa Records, Chaputa Records in Portugal, coming out sometime this year. I'm not sure when. As you're looking through the Teenage Tupelo book, you might have noticed the Chaputa section where Escar Accelerado, who puts out the Chaputa, he puts out ramps reissues, cool stuff, things that are happening now. And there's a guy named Rui Ricardo, the artist. And Rui Ricardo has painted new covers for all the reissues of all the things that Long Gone John, for Sympathy for the Record Industry, put out in the 90s. So here it is 20 years later, man. And I'm having a new rebirth through this amazing record label in Portugal. And Rui, they asked me, how do you want to present these? What do you want to do? And I'm like, your painted covers are fantastic. It gives the movies a whole other credence and tone that they never had, that I never had before when I designed the covers for Sympathy. So Rui created these covers of The Sore Losers, which is Corinne looking amazing with a smoking gun with her heel on Emmy Collins' head. And then Rui painted Delana and the Manhaters for that record that came out in 2018. And now he's painted this new cover for Superstarlet, which I cannot wait. And all the records have gatefolds of catfights featured in the films. But Superstarlet's never been released. And dude, I gotta tell you, I held on to one copy of a CD master of all the songs, soundtrack songs on Superstarlet A.D. I finally got around to digitizing it, probably at the point where it was going to get scratched or something. And all those songs were saved by the grace of God to be on this vinyl.
So how did the Teenage Tupelo book come about?
For the last 10 years, I wanted to do some sort of compendium on the movies because people like my stuff, but it's not like people know about my stuff. And I'm a father with 2 kids, and I've done a lot of things that have completely avoided a career or created an environment for my kids to grow up in a comfortable environment where they didn't have to worry about money. So I thought maybe it would be cool not only just to have a book that explains my movies, comics, whatever, for people in fandom or out there in cultdom, but also maybe something where my kids understand why Dad did what he did for certain reasons, and a lot of them having to do with Elvis and adoption and sexploitation, which is what Teenage Tupelo is about. But initially I thought the book would be called Man Without a Drive-In, which would explain the current shitty stage of pop culture that we're living in. But ironically, in Memphis, we have a 4-screen drive-in called the Summer Drive-In. That's the Malco chain that Lightman family, the Tashi family. They've been in business for 115 or 20 years, privately owned theater chain in the South. And they have let me and Matt Martin at Black Lodge Video curate and program a series called Time Warp Drive-In on Screen 4 at the Drive-In once a month. We show retro cinema, and we are now experiencing our 11th season. Give the people what they want, which is basically stuff you could watch on 80s, 90s cable type, like what you could have seen in the mall in the 80s. You don't want to get too far down the wormhole with Truffaut or something, otherwise you'll be out of business. We give the people what they want, and Time Warp Drive-In is in its 11th season. But all that has happened, and I'm like, I got to say, one of my proudest moments was having a retrospective of all my films at the Drive-In. And how many people can say that? How many filmmakers can say that? But that meant that I couldn't really call the volume Man without a Drive-In, because I certainly had a Drive-In. So that being the case, having no patrons or backers for the project anyway, let it go. I note carded it. I collected photographs, had been writing essays on GorillaMonsterFilms.com, which needed to be revised and rewritten. And then COVID happened. And right before COVID happened, I reached out to Dennis Black, who was half of Black and White Records. And I said, hey, man, would you even consider paying for a book project that might have a vinyl record enclosed with it for Teenage? That Teenage Tupelo volume would be an overview of everything I'd done before and afterwards, but mostly focusing on Delana and the Man-Haters, Kristen, Sophie Couch, Dawn Ashcraft, and see what we could come up with. And the book started out at 100 pages because most of the money was going to be for the vinyl, 300 copies, maybe a very limited run vanity edition. And so we started out, and Brian Dixon was a designer, and he was doing it in InDesign, which is an amazing program. And he was very quick about it. But with COVID, I had more time to think about what I wanted for the book to be. And I kept adding pages and adding pages. I didn't think they were unjustified. I was just trying to tell a story that was more in line with what Taschen would put out. Because Taschen, to me, is the end-all and be-all of book publishers. And after we'd gotten so many, like 200 pages designed, maybe more than that, I showed it to Gary Groth at Fantagraphics, and he goes, yeah, I'd put this out. And of course, the irony there was I had not been published by Fantagraphics books in 30 years, literally. And I'm like, so I said, Gary, I met you. We flew out, me and a friend flew out to Seattle around 2017 or so. And I refreshed my friendship with Gary again, had not talked to him literally in decades. And wasn't even sure what he thought, because I was one of those guys who didn't put out a lot of comics, was always late, was not what Fantagraphics was known for, obviously. And I showed him some Kid Anarchy pages that I was doing. I'd done Kid Anarchy as a 3-issue thing back in the day, 91, 92. And he said, yeah, I'd publish this. And I said, don't you want to read the screenplay? We'd like to do it as a movie, but we're never going to find the money. Can I do it as a graphic novel? And he said, sure. He said, I don't have to read the screenplay. I don't have time to draw it, and I'll publish it. And I thought, my God, and I mentioned this in the book, if I'd found a movie producer or a movie investor with that sort of acumen and faith and just ballsiness, then I would have been doing movies like left and right. But here was Gary willing to put out, and still is, my Kid Anarchy graphic novel based on this new screenplay. Meanwhile, John Cry, my producer friend in Los Angeles, is trying to find the money to make the movie. And I've been, again, slow drawing it because I have a style that I want to live up to. The DC 60s humor, Bob Oxner style that I want to very much know what I want it to look like. And it takes time. Not so much time that I die first. But anyway, all that said, I said, hey, Gary, I don't know about the Kid Anarchy graphic novel, but what do you think about the first couple hundred pages of this Teenage Tupelo book, which, by the way, I left comics for to do back in 94, 5. And he goes, this is beautiful. It's amazing. It does look like a Taschen publication. Fantagraphics would be honored to publish it. And then I go back to Dennis, and I'm like, Dennis, can you help me with this and see it through? And he said, yes, he's a fantastic person. And lo and behold, throughout the entirety of COVID. And then we finally turned it in with some of Gary's people there and a friend of mine named Charlene Struckoff, who finished the book out. And that's the book that you have in your hands. And we really need to move the copies because at Fantagraphics, nobody really remembers my comic book work. I'm not sure I'm considered a cartoonist of any merit. At the same time, I'm an underground filmmaker that the comic book people don't know about through Fantagraphics. Once again, I've created some sort of fucking anomaly that has no audience other than people who think for themselves or are struck by something if they leaf through it, or the incredible Dust Jacket by Nero Walker, who's an Australian painter of Faster Pussycat Kill images that I found on the internet. And again, it was COVID, and she's like, yeah, I'll paint the Dust Jacket. So again, it's this international thing where you got the Portuguese record label, you've got the Australian Dust Jacket artist, you've got the people in Fantagraphics in Seattle. I'm very lucky to have these connections. And all the women that were in Teenage Tupelo, we're all friends. We all love each other. We're still good friends 30 years later. So everybody got paid again for being naked in the movie. So that's how the book came to be.
I'll tell you, the book was amazing. And you're right. It does feel very Tashin, and that's what I feel your work deserves. So I was really just couldn't believe how great it looked when I opened up that package. I was like, this is the book. This is the book that JMM has put together. This is amazing.
I peaked as a human being when it came out. I've been trying to do sculpture, and I did the Johnny Cash sculpture in Memphis. It was unveiled, I think 2018, something like that. And I peaked as a human being then. That's my way of looking at it. The book, at least, if I can talk patrons out of money to support my past habits, then what I did in the past must have some validity. And if the greatest comic book publisher on earth wants to put out a book on an exploitation film, which is obviously a graphic novel come to life, then I'm pleased to do that as well.
Speaking of people giving you money, where's the best place for people to give you money? Do you have a website or anything, or should we be ordering through the publisher website? But I want people to be able to order the DVDs as well, or Blu-rays, I should say.
My email address is the best way for anyone out there to reach me, to buy a movie, to ask me what's going on with projects, all kinds of stuff. Believe me, I have many ways to spend an investor or patron's money, as long as they're cool with the idea of having it finished. A lot of times, Nan Hackman helped me get through the Sore Losers project, and she's passed away. God bless her. She was a wonderful person. And I said, Dan, why are you dumping all this money into the Sore Losers Blu-ray? And she goes, because you finish what you start. And I think a lot of investors, they give money to nonprofits, or they give money to individuals who maybe don't finish things. God knows I've had some Kickstarter projects that I need to wrap up. But with the intimacy of knowing somebody and meeting them and having coffee and living your life through having meetings and stuff with them, and I'm not saying it has to be that way, but the Sore Losers, Teenage Tupelo, and the book, the movie, the Blu-ray came out of intimate relationships with people who you actually see on a one-on-one basis. You can write me at jmm.memphis@gmail.com. That's JM like John Michael McCarthy. And you can buy Blu-rays from me. They're around $40 a piece. The Teenage Tupelo Blu-ray, I thought had 6 or 7 hours. You say 20? I like that even better, 20. Because there's lots of copyright. And this goes back to my point that maybe I didn't finish earlier. When I'm said and done with, and I've done whatever it is I'm going to do, I will hand my children a Blu-ray of Teenage Tupelo, which has other things on it as well, which are copyrightable, which are products that their old man made. Otherwise, what are these things going to do? Finally falter on hard drives somewhere and just go bad because we've lost the analog or the film ideal. Sore Losers, same thing. Tons of copyrighted material of my short films, rock videos, weird things that were on there. You can buy those things from me by emailing me. People find me through word of mouth and in a very underground way. And then they're talking to the writer director when they find me, and I'm selling them something I put together with my own hands. And there's a more spiritual connection to that. I think there's no middleman really. reach out to me that way. That's probably the safest, best way, jmm.memphis@gmail.com. I have a website called GorillaMonsterFilms.com, which you can go to my YouTube channel on. I haven't updated the website in 10 years. And I've got relics and artifacts there of Cigarette Girl and things like that. But I had met the last starlet, so-called, in 2006, Corey Dials, who sang in my band, Fingers Like Saturn. And then she was the star of Cigarette Girl. And I wanted her to be in a Cadaver movie. We made a short film. I would like to release a proper Blu-ray on Cigarette Girl, which is basically just a worshipful shrine to Corey Dials, who looks like she stepped out of a Frank Frazetta painting, and one of the most beautiful women I've ever met. And so maybe that would be in the future. Superstarlet A.D. LP, Blu-ray would include Shine On. There's a possibility of Broad Daylight coming out somehow, somewhere this year. I don't know any details on that yet. It's been out of print since 2004, 20 years. Do you have a copy of Broad Daylight? It's penis enlargement the old-fashioned way. And can I plug one more thing? I would be remiss not to mention two great friends, Mike Hunchback and Noel Huffman. Noel Huffman puts on a yearly event in Indianapolis, Indiana, called Dead Formats. Be careful, you might wind up being the guest of honor for one of these things. But on August 24th in Indianapolis, I'm going to be the guest of honor at Dead Formats 5. And you can Google and find out about it. But Noel's putting the night before, on the 23rd, we're going to show Teenage Tupelo at the Can in Indianapolis, Can Theater. 24th, we're going to show Damsel, This Daughter of Helvis for the 30th anniversary. And if there was ever a dead format to be brought to light, it's Damsel, This Daughter of Helvis shot on Super VHS and released on VHS only ever, until, we should talk about this just very briefly, Saturn's Core, aka Vinegar Syndrome, has just released Damsel, This Daughter of Helvis on Blu-ray, and that was in large part thanks to Mike Hunchback. So I will be at Dead Formats. I'll be showing Teenage Tupelo on August 23rd, showing Damsel This on the 24th, and maybe organizing a loose tour of that area, maybe Chicago. I'm not sure. It's all coming together right now. So we'll see what happens. I am Super Tupelo on Instagram, and you can check me out there. And that's coming up in the near future. And I would love for anybody to come out and come to Dead Formats and meet me at the show. Hugh Gallagher's going to be there, also from the Gore Trilogy. Polycyclone is going to perform live. So yeah, wanted to throw that in there.
Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate this.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Appreciate the time. Hope it was worth the time.
All these chicks at school, but they don't want me. They run around all over town, they put me down, oh why must they taunt me? I bought my car from the sleaziest creep in town. It runs behind, the gears all grind, the slip ain't mine and it broke down. I'm a loser, baby, why would you waste your time? Soul loser, baby, don't even keep on trying. Soul loser, baby, I ain't even got a dime. Mom and Dad are so square, I'm constantly hounded. I went to school, I got thrown out, I wonder what it's all about. I'm grounded. I'm washing dishes at the Fat Boy Greasy Spoon. The rats are tall, the paycheck's small, the roaches crawl. I hope I die soon. I'm a loser, baby, why would you waste your time? So loser, baby, don't even keep on trying. I'm a loser, baby, I ain't even got a dime. Your time, a soul loser, baby, don't even keep on trying.